Welcome to the I Learn, Therefore I Can podcast, an iRise performance consulting production where we explore the dynamic world of performance through a learning and development lens with a focus on achieving excellence. I'm your host, Lonnie Gregory, and I'm inspired by those of you that wish to be better at what you've been asked to do. Gilmore Crosby and rock and roll were both born in the 1950s, and they suit each other. On the other hand, he spent his early childhood in segregated Nashville, and racism, sexism, and classism don't suit Gilmore at all. With values deeply rooted in social justice, Gilmore has built a unique career helping people connect and treat each other with dignity and respect. He is an author, a grandfather, an organizational development master practitioner, and an engaging public speaker. His knowledge draws on his own 40-plus years of experience and that of his father, Robert P. Crosby, who began his own OD career back in the 1950s. Gilmore jumped at the chance in 1984 to be his father's assistant on a bitterly contentious project for the city of Spokane, Washington, to decide the future of the main downtown park. He's been going strong ever since, with international experience in Egypt, Spain, Mexico, Chile, Germany, Poland, Canada, and Jamaica, Yemen, as well as years spent at Pepco Nuclear and as an IT change management consultant with EDS. Gilmore is happily married to his wife, Alicia, a Jamaican, and considers Jamaica his second home. This is so fantastic. Gilmore's seventh book, Diversity Without Dogma, a collaborative approach to leading DEIA education in action, was published by Routledge in 2023. Friends, join me to have a wonderful conversation with a brand new friend of mine, Gilmore Crosby. Hey friends, we have an interesting conversation coming up with my brand new friend, Gilmore L. Crosby. Say hey, Gilmore.
Hi.
So, Gilmore and I are new acquaintances. We met on the LinkedIn platform. I love this platform. I responded to a post. Gilmore responded to my response, and then we got into a dialogue. And we got a phone call going. We introduced ourselves to one another. We shared some things, and we realized we have a lot in common. We have a similar background, a similar perspective. Our initial conversation was so rich, and I'm so grateful that I can now claim a brand new friend on LinkedIn
Nice.
because we've decided to become in sync. So, to my new friend Gilmore, how you doing, man? How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm blessed.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that's a good word. I like using that word, blessed. I feel very similarly. So, friends, like I said, Gilmore and I got into a conversation because he responded to one of my posts, and it was about an application of a particular type of theory with respect to what we were talking about. And again, it was fascinating. It's the type of thing that excites me, gets me up in the morning. And after our conversation, I knew I had to have him on the podcast to share this conversation with you all, and some other interesting things about Gilmore. Gilmore, before we get like into the heart of our discussion,
mhm.
I am curious, what is it that we can understand about you that I can't learn from LinkedIn?
Well, I want to help create a society that is as equal as possible across the entire planet. And I think humans can do that. We've had so that's my passion is how do we uh, continue to progress. Sometimes it seems like we go a little forward and then 10 steps backwards, and the human race is still a bit of a mess, but I think better things are possible. So I don't know, that's one thing. Maybe that is in my LinkedIn profile though. So uh,
Yeah, your LinkedIn profile is very specific about your philosophy, for sure. Um,
I have been. I'll just say this. This will be brief. I was brought up by my father, who was really a social experimenter, and so I was in a hippie-free school for 6 years.
Hippie free school?
Yeah, in Spokane, Washington. That's the best way to describe it. It was an experimental school from the time I was 11 till the time I graduated from high school. I was, and I had long hair, and it was the 70s, and I was definitely a hippie. There's,
How about that? Not too many people admit to being a hippie. Congratulations.
I think they had a lot of things right. Peace, love, organic food,
Exactly. Exactly. Many of the
anti-war.
Yeah, many of the sentiments from that generation, our generation, right?
Mhm.
We're in the same generation, are still evident today. Particularly those issues around peace and love and harmony. Um, like, can't we all just get along? And I believe your research, the work that you do, suggests that there are ways that we can get along. Isn't that right?
Absolutely.
Outstanding. So, friends, you may have seen from the promotional material, there's this picture of Gilmore on a camel. Did you see that? That's a great shot. Hey, Gilmore, tell us a little bit more about that picture on the camel.
Well, I was working with Egyptian management teams at the time. And so I had time, it wasn't far from the pyramids. And so I got to the pyramids several times, enough that I realized that you can just walk in, you pay a ticket, but you don't have to have an escort. And I knew my way around enough to, just not have to have somebody trying to guide me. And and I like it when I get to a place enough that I start to understand what's, the local culture and not just the tourist stuff. And
Right.
I did at one point have a 3 mile camel ride with my ex-wife and my son and his girlfriend across the Sahara from the area of the Great Pyramids to the first pyramid. So that was an exciting adventure.
Wow. 3 mile camel ride. I've watched a few like movies with camels in it. I'm very curious. They don't move too fast, do they?
They clip along pretty good.
Do they?
Once they get going, yeah, not enough that I was ever afraid. Like, I'm not like a great horseback rider. They weren't as fast as a horse, but
Gotcha. Gotcha. Anyway, friends, you saw the picture. It's pretty impressive. I was very curious about that. What else can you share about that experience? Like, particularly, what were the takeaways? What did you learn? What did you apply to your life from that experience?
well, certainly one thing is that Imhotep, who designed the pyramids, the first pyramids, was the founder of really engineering and medicine and astronomy. So this was an African man who really started much of science as we know
Wow.
it today. So that was something to learn. And just working with the Egyptians also was, of course, an educational thing. And humans, we have differences, cultural differences, but we have a lot in common everywhere you go. I've been in maybe 20 different cultures, nations, working with people, and
Yeah, we are
so.
kind of similar, right? We we eat food, we
Mm-hmm.
listen to music,
Mm-hmm.
we listen to stories, right? We're storytellers. Um, it is. I'm glad you had a chance to have that experience. It's very powerful. So, one of the things that fascinated me about you in our initial conversation was your almost, I'll say, dedication to a particular theory, a way of thinking and applying that theory to the world, to life, to your life, and to the work that you do in supporting others at being better at what it is that they've been asked to do, but from a very particular perspective. Now, friends, while you can consider this the kickoff to the DEIA series, um, I was thinking more of I met a new friend on LinkedIn, and I was very excited about that. But they seem to come together very nicely. We're about to approach a series dedicated to DEIA and where it's going, what it is, what's really happening. I've publicly said that DEIA is under attack, and I have some questions about that. Certainly, Gilmore and I talked about that. And again, I'm excited to have a new friend to have these conversations with. But Gilmore, you do have a particular perspective um, uh, that you apply to your work. Can you share a little bit more about that perspective, and particularly Kurt Lewin and what Kurt Lewin has said, has done, and how you apply that to the work that you're currently doing?
I'd love to. So you might have to stop me if I'm taking too much time.
Please go
Uh,
for it, man. We
can,
got
can,
time.
can I show the book cover that has a picture of Kurt?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, I
cool.
think you can.
Well, that's Kurt. Whoop.
That's Kurt. There he is, friends. Look at that
Yeah,
title.
and
Man changed. I like that. Why Kurt Lewin social science is still best practice for business results, change management, and human progress. By our friend on the phone, Mr. Crosby. Telling you in for a treat, friends.
so Kurt Lewin created a social science, and really sort of social science in general. It comes from Kurt Lewin, even though there's other people that have helped create it. But he created a specific approach. So he is a Jewish man who grew up born in 1890 in Prussia. Uh, he was already experiencing institutional racism from the moment he was born. Even before the Nazis came into power, being Jewish in that part of Europe and in a lot of places on Earth was not easy. And so his parents were farmers and they could not own their own land.
Hmm.
They had to rent it from another person, and that was the law. So there's often laws like slavery was legal in the United
Right.
States that are bad laws, and so need to be challenged. And so I personally like it when there's good laws and people follow them, but there's sometimes when there's bad laws. So anyway, so Lewin grew up in that atmosphere, got his PhD at the University of Berlin in psychology, and started looking at things like what makes democracy work and not work,
Hmm.
and how do autocrats come into power? Hitler was elected in 1933. That's when Lewin fled to the United States,
Hmm.
where the United States had uh, its own racism issues, and not just
Still does.
towards Jews, towards African Americans, of course, also, and still to this present day, clearly. And so we still have our own issues, but he could not, even though he had money and a PhD, he could not get his mother out of Germany, and the Nazis executed her.
Wow.
So he was very interested in racism. And so his social science is in some ways simple. Like he helped with all kinds of change projects where, so for instance, the U.S. government wanted farmers to irrigate differently in the Midwest because of the drought. And they weren't listening to the experts that were being sent out to talk to them.
Hmm.
So Lewin did this, and this sort of explains all his approach to change. He had this expert lecture at one group of farmers the way they normally were doing it, sort of like tell them what to do. And then he traced over time, and like 5% of those farmers actually did what they were being told. The rest of them said, to heck with this. What do these people know about farming? They didn't like how they were being talked to, etc. So then another group of farmers, the same lecturer, to make this as objective as possible, lectured. He gave a briefer lecture though, and Lewin wanted him to include any flaws that he saw in the government's own stuff or any gaps. Not try to sell it so much. So keep it brief, don't sell it. And then he had the farmers talk to them amongst themselves, have dialogue amongst themselves, and consider like what made sense to them about what they're hearing, what doesn't make sense, and what do they know that the expert doesn't know about the conditions they're facing, and ultimately, what do they want to do? And so they came up with their own solutions. And Lewin did this with group after group in all kinds of circumstances. Whenever people came up with their own solutions in his research, they implemented successfully 80 to 90% of what they came up with.
How about that? So let me just recap real quick. In Lewin's research, when he allowed the people who do the work to put forth how the work should be done, and when they crafted their own solution and implemented it, it was 80 to 90% successful time over time. Is that right?
That's it.
I think there's a lesson in there for us, friends.
There's a big lesson. It could put me out of business because it's not that hard to do. My dad learned about Lewin's stuff in 1953 and started applying it to, he was a United Methodist minister at the time. And so one thing he started applying it to was social justice. Also LGBTQ rights.
Wow, back in the 50s?
Yes.
No kidding.
And even with his activism as a teenager, his parents were supportive. So I come from a line of people who were against oppression, basically. My grandfather was in the church in Pittsburgh, Wilkinsburg, where he was a lay, member of the highly respected hourly worker, poor, never went to college, dedicated to getting his kids through college. And when I think there was a conservative group came around, maybe the John Birch Society, and gave a bunch of books to the church, and grandfather happened to be the guy who received the books, and he said, "Thank you very much." And then he went and stuck them in the furnace and burned them. And he also, Dad had a very close black friend when he was a teenager that was in the barbershop quartet with him. And they were over all the time to Grandma and Grandpa's place. And
wait a minute, your dad sang in a barbershop quartet?
Yes, he did.
You gotta love it, friends.
And he taught me to sing in the barbershop quartet.
And
so
do you sing, Gilmore?
I sing best when I'm in a barbershop quartet, and I know what I'm doing. Whereas Dad's he's 95. He still sings Italian opera and so on. Yeah. He knows how to he can take a crowd of 300 people and turn them into a 4-part harmony in a matter of minutes.
Nice.
Yeah, that actually sounds good. But he went on to march in the civil rights movement in Nashville to integrate church camps during segregation and so on. So he was always. He still is. He's still writing letters to the editor. He's still committed to social justice, LGBTQ rights, etc. He's performed many weddings for the LGBTQ community, going back again to the 60s, 70s. And so that's the atmosphere I came out of. And Lewin was the source for Dad, but Dad didn't actually know that much about Lewin. And then I worked with my father since 1984, and it was only in the last few years that I realized that I had never really read the source material. Lewin wrote hundreds of articles,
Mm.
certainly 100 articles, let me put it that way, in books. And people were criticizing him. And I was like, well, it doesn't seem like these people that were criticizing him even know what he said. And then I started thinking, well, I don't really know, that well what he said. So that's why I decided that shame on me. I'm going to read as much as I can. And then I wrote this book with the green cover because his social science was intended to describe things small, large, human behavior, what works best, and certainly letting people solve their own problems with support
Mm.
and so that works in communities. He worked on race relations in Connecticut in 1946,
Mm.
trying to get more equitable pay for the garbage collectors who were all black at the time in Connecticut. He thought that was part of the solution. There'd be less tension if people weren't being basically robbed, while they worked,
Thank you for that. Yeah.
by being paid pennies. And so, and he did it by bringing the whole community together, including the white business owners, because that's all there was, white men running businesses and newspapers and so on. But by inviting everybody in and then having dialogue, and he also believed that education is only likely to really influence people's beliefs, and this is important for the diversity movement. Uh, if you allow people to think for themselves, you don't police what they say so heavily that people are afraid to say what they really think, and you let them have dialogue amongst their peers. You give them some theory like uh, that race is a false hypothesis. There's no scientific validity to it. Yes, we have different skin pigmentation, but that's just because my ancestors migrated from Africa and got stuck someplace really cold and went through many generations without much sunlight.
About
Uh,
nobody's fault, right?
yeah, it doesn't make my DNA or my ancestors or me any smarter or any stupider. And the same with any skin pigmentation. There's no relationship to anything like intelligence,
Wow.
and any belief that one group is better than another is just BS. Actually, it's just, and it's easy to
Yeah.
do. It's easy to say, well, my group, is better than the other. Like I'm in a small city. That's better than being in a big city, and I'm not on a farm. It's and so on. I mean, it's just easy to say my region of the country is better, etc. But none of that's actual. It's just maybe it's soothing to the ego or something,
Mm.
but it's not scientific.
I'm listening to I Learned, Therefore I Can, an iRise Performance Consulting podcast. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the conversation. Let's pick up where we left off. We're 15 minutes away from being
Not
better
scientific.
at what we've been asked to do.
So you present information like that, which is pretty strongly validated by science, and then you give people a chance to talk to each other instead of just lecturing at them.
Right.
And then you have a much higher chance of influencing beliefs. And I know because I've been through some of the DEI workshops when I was now researching my latest book, which is also based on Kurt Lewin. I went through a bunch of workshops, and believe me, some of them were very painful, and it was very confrontational. And the idea was you have to change people, you have to to change society. You start by telling the white people in the room, which is using the classification system that was created to divide people in this country. And I'll say a little about that in a minute.
Yeah, please
It's the
do.
last. Okay, cool. But it just started by saying, okay, white people, you are racist. If you're white, you're racist. It's automatic. You're part of the power structure that exists. You can't escape it. And the workshop's all about the white people trying to understand their bias, which is assumed to exist. And so it it's based on shame, basically, and and what I like about it is it helps raise the self-esteem of the other people in the workshop that aren't in the white category, and that's needed, so it's got good intentions,
Right.
but it basically upsets a lot of the pale skinned people that are in the room, especially the males are, given particular feedback, that's critical. And
Especially
and
females. So did you find that females respond differently to the same type of uh, suggestions?
I think that because women are also an oppressed minority historically and up to this time, it's easier for them to identify with other people who are oppressed,
Mm,
and they're a little bit less a target, I think, of the DEI people who really are confrontational, which
gotcha.
isn't all DEI people. But anyway, Lewin's research on education suggests what I think it makes sense to me is that if people get confronted and just like criticized, they're likely to walk out the door just being upset at the people that confronted them. They aren't likely to actually change their thinking any.
Yeah.
And so it is just creating more pushback. And so, as you know, there's a fair amount of pushback on DEI right now.
Right now, yeah,
Some
tremendous.
of that is because there's been pushback on any attempt at social equity throughout the history of the United States.
Yeah, so this pushback isn't new
That's
necessarily,
correct.
but it's more pervasive, more
Well, I think
powerful, more public, and
some of it's because of the way DEI is being done. It asks for pushback. So, because again, Lewin applied physics to his theories. When you push, people
it
push
responds.
back.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, it's not rocket science. So,
it's physics, not rocket science.
yeah, and it's loose physics. I have a son with a PhD in physics. He says that's not physics, but uh,
I think you need
he
to get your son on the
you,
program so
you
we can talk
should.
about the relationships that
He helps
push.
me hold a higher standard of what I claim is physics. But the basic principle is there, and it does happen with humans. Even though it's different than physical science, but it does happen with humans. You push people, they likely push back, even if they might have liked the thing you're pushing on them. And so, what's the use of approaching it by pushing? Now, sometimes you have to push, like the civil rights movement required confrontation, nonviolent confrontation. I think that made a lot of sense. And just waiting, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, we've been waiting. How long more are we supposed to wait? So, there's a limit to that, to passivity.
Yeah,
Uh, but okay. So the quick history lesson. This is sort of the last thing that I'm hoping to squeeze in here. As I studied to write this book, one thing I think is that like Germany, if you go anywhere in Germany, it doesn't take long to find statues of Jewish people being loaded onto trains,
mm,
and all their luggage is off to the side in the statue, and all their belongings have been taken from them, and they're on their way to the death camps. And so Germany came out of World War II partially with Lewin's help, because Lewin influenced the reconstruction of Germany.
mm,
The U.S. can't go in there and say we're experts on democracy, do it our way, because Lewin said if you do that, they'll just laugh at you because they know how you're treating black people, for instance, in the United States.
wow. So
So,
was that now again? Certainly that makes sense to me.
uh-huh.
That any regular person would say, how can you propose such a thing when you're not handling your business similarly at
Mm-hmm.
home? So I can understand, just the rank and file mom and pop sitting at the table. Was there actually a pronounced and public display of that sentiment?
Well, there's certainly is now if you travel the world and say that you are from the United States and we're here to help, or you're from the United States and we're models of democracy or something, and even now people will laugh, so, or at least be skeptical. But Lewin was anticipating it. I'm not saying it. So what he advised was, yes, absolutely insist that Germany establish a democracy and and hopefully they learn from the lessons of their prior democracy, which had, in his eyes, failed because it had allowed racism, it had allowed the rise of the Nazis. He thinks that democracy that equates, if you equate democracy with anything goes, like everybody's individual freedom is more important than the collective good,
Mm-hmm.
then you are asking for trouble from people who want to use those freedoms to overthrow democracy.
Sounds familiar.
Doesn't it? Well, not only should it sound familiar, but the slogan for Hitler was "Make Germany Great Again."
All
So,
right, I'm gonna leave that alone. I'm not gonna go there.
but true facts. That was the
Learning.
slogan. So anyway, fast forward or go backwards. Actually, just a brief thing about the colonization of this continent. And I was brought up with stories like the United States was established because people wanted religious freedom, they wanted political, democracy, and that's far from the truth. So it is true the Pilgrims were persecuted in England and fled here. That's partially, I think, because they were not very pleasant to be around. Like they were against anything, just certainly they were against sex. They were very old school or whatever they were, in their approach to their Christianity, and so they were not easy to relate to for most people.
Mm.
But they did have a fair amount of political interest in, like the Mayflower Pact was essentially a democratic structure, and they came partially though because they had conflict.
Gotcha.
So with the structure they were trying to do, which was more class based. So, but the Virginia colony had nothing to do with any kind of aspirations towards democracy or religious freedom. They were happily sent as representatives of the King of England. They were seeking profit. That was their job. It was a company, the Virginia Company. They were they were members, the elite, the ruling class. They kept their class structure. They were all members of the Church of England. They had no illusions or interest that they were somehow going to not be. And so they got here and they established what has had a huge influence. A colony that had classism right from the beginning. It wasn't long till they brought in 100 Irish indentured servants. The British had only within the last 100 years or something before that conquered the Irish brutally, taken all their land, forced them into basically slavery. And so they brought 100 indentured servants here that had no rights. They could whip them, beat them, maim them, shoot them. They had no rights. They set up pillories in the town square, and they would, like put somebody in the stocks and whip them and leave them there for days. And so they had this whole structure, which became the structure for slavery in the U.S. And the Irish, as the colony grew, rose up over and over again. There were small rebellions. And then in 1619 came the first African slave ship.
Yes, I have that book, the 1619 Project. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just about to read it. That's one I haven't read. So I'm in a book club, and we're now just starting that one. But there's plenty of documentation about that in other places, and which is worth reading, including in my book. I mean, there's just the way the slave trade was conducted in Africa, the way people were packed into those ships. Of course, many didn't survive.
The Middle Passage was brutal.
It was, needlessly, but I mean, it was. And so, anyway, when the first African slaves were here in Virginia, the Irish and the Africans quickly realized they had more in common with each other than they did with the people running the colony, and so they started rising up together.
How about that?
And then there was Bacon's Rebellion. I want to say 1670, something like that, and they almost overthrew the government. They almost killed off the upper class. They burned the armory. They took over the capital. They scared the heck out of the British. And so the British sent in troops, lots of troops, and reestablished what they called order. And then they adopted what they had done in Britain to stop uprisings, which they had a lot of revolutions in Britain for centuries. Because the upper classes kept taking all the land from the poor people that were farmers. And pretty soon there was nothing left but Oliver Twist. Lots of poor people in cities with no jobs. And yeah, which, I mean, and then a middle class of police and institution overlords and judges. And all these people had jobs now controlling the poor. And so they had a stake in the social order. And also in England, any man could beat a woman. Any husband had the right to even kill his wife if he thought she was being unruly.
In England?
Yes. So this was exported into the United States at the beginning, before we were the United States, the Virginia colony.
So we have a foundation, a genesis, a creation that is rooted in these things that we still experience today and have to reconcile. So this is not new. These sentiments are not new.
Autocracy, sexism, autocracy based on racism. Anyway, after Bacon's Rebellion, the British here said, okay, we're going to create a middle class here too, just like we had in England. It worked from their perspective. We'll make the Irish, the indentured servants, the overlords of the black slaves. And so that was the first police in the United States. Their task, and in my book, I even have the first thing that was posted that used the words white. They didn't call blacks or African Americans black or African American back then. They called them Negroes, mulattoes, etc. So that language is in there, but it's the first time they used the word white, and they said, if you find 2 or 3 blacks gathered together, you have legal right to shoot them.
Whoa!
This was posted on all the churches and all the government buildings.
I'm amazed.
And also, if you're a white woman and you have a child with a black person, you will be a servant for like 30 years, and your child will be a servant for 30 years once they're born. Or the white woman might be banished from the colony into the wilderness. Although a funny thing was, when people escaped the colony, indentured servants and black slaves got out into the wilderness to the Native Americans, most of them very much preferred the life they had with the Native Americans.
Wow.
Yeah, it
So
was.
you know what? I didn't realize, and friends, I never know exactly where these conversations are going to go, what you're going to learn. We just experienced an incredible like history lesson that Gilmore had researched and studied. Again, I don't think there's anything that we don't know, but just to hear it, just to understand foundationally how this nation was put together and what some of those elements are. I really appreciate that, Gilmore. I
Uh,
am curious about two things though. This knowledge that you possess, that you grew up with, learning, that you've researched, that you've written about. How do you apply that to your work now in the DEI space using Kurt Lewin's philosophies and the things that you've researched? How do you apply that today?
well, I just finished a two 1 day workshops with my wife and I working together, and which helps my entry into DEI. She's Jamaican,
She's Jamaican.
and
Hey
so yeah,
man, so am I.
really, are you
Yes, my people are Jamaican. My people
nice?
are. I'm a first generation American. My sisters and I, first
Okay.
generation Americans. Everybody else is from Jamaica. So good for you. I knew we were gonna get along, friends. I knew there was a reason that we were destined to meet.
You know,
Wow.
you can only partially see it. Well, here, I guess I can turn there. There's the Jamaican symbol. You know, the civil
Yeah,
symbol.
there it is. I can
Yeah.
dang, out of one people, many or something. Yeah.
Yep, and it has Arawaks on the
Yeah.
symbol, even though Columbus literally killed every Arawak in Jamaica when he arrived.
Yeah, my dad used to tell me stories about the Maroons
Mm-hmm.
in Jamaica and how they ran up into the hills to.
Yeah, they succeeded in resisting the British.
Yes.
Yeah, they never got conquered.
Wow.
And they still don't pay taxes to this very day. It's the Jamaican government doesn't hasn't tried to reimpose.
And left them alone.
Yeah, yeah. It's best if we leave the Maroons alone.
Wow. Sorry to
Yeah,
get off track,
that's
but
all
I
right.
didn't know this. But yeah, so how are you applying these things to your practice right now?
Well, so we just had these 2 days with two one 1 day sessions with people where we're applying Lewin's approach to education for one thing, which is that you frequently stop and let people talk to each other and establish from the beginning that uh, this is not a workshop about this subject where people are going to be like blamed just based on their physical characteristics.
Right.
Uh, and so I'm just want to share like we have the participants at the end rate things. One is I felt respected, and it's a 1 to 10 scale, and everybody that went through it gave it a 10.
Wow.
So it's a
Congratulations. Good
perfect
for you.
10. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I feel pretty good about that. The other things are I value the learning, and I'd recommend this to others 9.3, 9.1 anonymous ratings. And so there's the educational process, there's learning how to do action research of your own to work in your community to address whatever issue is important to you, like gun violence. And so we spend time on that because like if you want to reduce gun violence, I suggest you have people from the areas with the gun violence. You have uh, police involved in the workshop.
Hmm.
You don't try to famously in Wilmington, Delaware. Here they got a bunch of money and they did a huge study a few years back. The social service agencies did, and almost everything that came from the study was the police department has to change.
Wow.
So they came up with all these recommendations, took them to the police department, and gave them to them, and
That
said,
didn't
"Fix
go over real well,
yourselves."
did it?
Yeah, it didn't go anywhere. I mean, I know a couple of the officers in the police department that are I think really well-intentioned people, and they just said it's right here. It's on the shelf right here. There's the study,
Wow.
and so you have to involve everybody that's important to the like gun shop people if you're trying to reduce gun violence.
Yeah.
Gang members, or people that are shooting each other. Uh, the little old lady that lives on the corner in the neighborhood where the most people are getting shot.
Yeah.
You bring them all together and then have a structure where they can hear each other and chew on things and come up with their own solutions. Uh,
Outstanding.
that's it. So that's where the workshop ends. The beginning of it is, I cover history even more than that was just a smidgen, but I do think there's
Was.
been authoritarianism in this country since the beginning, and that's it. We blew it. We had a chance after the Civil War to do something different and failed miserably. Uh, so, and right up to the present, there's like the PPP loans. If you were black and you went into a bank, you had a much less chance of getting a loan, even if you had the same financial,
Right.
conditions than a white person. And
Wow.
and these were loans that were 100% backed by the government, zero risk to the banker.
So here's what I'm realizing, Gilmore. We've got so much more to talk about. You have so much more to share. Um,
Your
I'd
time's
like to
up. I
just
know it
say
is.
publicly right now, I'd like to invite you back for additional conversations, perhaps join a panel
Sure.
of others around this topic. 'Cause I know even when we spoke initially, there were other pieces of things that we covered and addressed, but so much of your story is fascinating. Really appreciated the history. Um, but I do want to ask one question, and it's based upon the theme of this show. Certainly, you have dedicated yourself to learning these things so that you can support and promote others in being better. But specifically, what have you learned? Therefore, you can do X, right? I learned X, therefore I can Y. What would that be for you?
Well, one thing I really value the spiritual sources from around the world. And one is Don Miguel Ruiz, who says his family has carried on the oral tradition of the Mayans. There are some Mayans who say he's full of crap. He's just trying to sell books to white people, and which I don't know for sure because there's no way to prove it. It's oral history,
Right.
but I like what he teaches, and one is simply to do your best. He's got 5 principles. That's one of them. Just do your best. If you do your best, nothing. You'll always you'll always be okay with what happened, even if things go wrong. If you really gave your best, and so during the Great Recession, I had to drive a cab to survive. And I went at that, with that same kind of mindset. Okay, I'm going to give this my best. I mean, I haven't made any money for half a year because all my customers have gone into crisis or out of business. And
Right.
so I better do something. And I was fortunate to get with the local yellow cab people. And so I did my best. And I just think that's like almost a Zen way to approach any task. Why not just give it your best? Do your best. Now that's also what Reed Richards said to the Thing in Fantastic Four comic books back in the '60s. That stuck
Wow.
with me right away. It's okay, Ben. You did your best.
You did your best.
So I love Marvel comic books. I'm
How about that? Hey, how about
basically a
one
kid.
more question?
Okay.
And again, we couldn't have covered everything that you could possibly share. I couldn't have asked everything I want to ask, but I do want to ask this: is there something that I didn't ask that you would like to share, or is there a question you would just like to ask of yourself and answer it directly?
If I uh, had my druthers, I'd probably retire onto a Rasta farm and spend the rest of my days eating fruit and in the sunshine.
Good for
How's
you.
that? I don't know. That's what popped to mind since we were speaking about Jamaica. I've been in Jamaica really steady since 1999, so I've been blessed by that. I had
Yeah.
steady work there at a bauxite refinery, and
Yeah.
fell in love, found my wife there, and
Yeah,
so
we're gonna have to talk about this. Oh my gosh, friends, this is the power of conversation, the power of meeting folks, the power of actually syncing on LinkedIn as opposed to just being connected on LinkedIn. I feel so much richer, even just now. The things that I learned that I didn't learn in our initial conversations, and I'm also grateful and hopeful for the things that I am going to learn by more of these conversations, and particularly with Gilmore Crosby. Gilmore, thanks so much for joining me on this brief episode. Thanks for agreeing to come back for another episode when we talk with others about DEIA and what's going on and what we can do about it.
hey,
Friends, thanks for listening. This has been a true blessing for me. Gilmore, I hope you feel the same.
absolutely, it's been a pleasure. So I really appreciate this time.
Outstanding.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
meeting you. So
Be well, man.
take care, everyone.
All right, stick that on concludes for a this little while. episode of I Learn, Therefore I Can, an iRise Consulting Performance podcast. I don't know about you, but I'm feeling better about being better at what I was asked to do. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening, and thanks for learning, because learning matters and performance counts. Be well.